So now we come to the academic portion. It's fun to be at a college, so you can get out your pen and paper. What makes a material a candidate for repurposing? First up, S.A.V.E. standardized. The more standardized and uniform a waste stream, the more it's a candidate for repurposing. A pile of wood. If the call comes in, I got 2x4s, 2x6s, plywood, 32 inches, 84 inches, and 103 inches. It's just a random pile of mismatched lumber versus the business that calls in and says, we need 93-inch 2x4s. Home Depot, they don't sell 93-inch 2x4s. They sell 96, 8 foot. So they cut off 3 inches, hypothetical example. But we do hundreds of them. So they got hundreds of pieces of 2x4s that are 3 inches. Uniform and standard. Much easier to find that second life because it's all standardized. Next up. Availability. Is this a one-time waste stream or is this recurring? Think about all the examples so far. Military cargo parachutes. Somewhere in America, there's an outdoor advertising company, maybe Orlando, Florida for Disney, it may be Las Vegas, advertising all the casinos. Somewhere, billboard vinyls are being changed out today. McDonald's' $1.99 ad campaign is over. So it's always nice when it's a recurring waste stream because if you figure out that second life, or second lives, plural, there's more coming behind it. Very most important, versatility. We use it in a trifecta of words, generic, versatile, and adaptable. To demonstrate the chair you're sitting on, look at your neighbor's chair. You got metal, sort of 90-degree angles. You got some interesting casters. You got some blue fabric, and it's probably a little bit cushiony. So if Villanova University decides they're done with them and they put it on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, what's the person that buys them probably going to do with it? Probably going to keep them as a chair. It's specialized. By contrast, let's look at the doors in the back of the room. So they're tearing this building down. You know, you take the hardware off, you take the push bars off, you take the hinges off. You just got, in that case, a steel panel. How many people have in their garage an old door, you go horizontal with it and make a shelf out of it? So generic, versatile, adaptable. By way of demonstration, a 500-gallon propane tank, life number one, at rural residences, and they fill these with propane, and that becomes their source of fuel to heat their homes during the winter. Get retired for different reasons, but epitomizes generic, versatile, adaptable because if they're GVA, typically there's more than one application for it in a second life. Any carnivores? So they become smokers or barbecuers. To go up the food chain, if you're a carnivore, you show it to a livestock owner, and they're going to cut it in half long ways and make a feed trough out of it. Now, if you're really good at geometry, you're really good with a cutting torch, and you're really good with a welder, you take all the angles and invert them and weld them back together, and you got a park bench. So GVA, generic, versatile, and adaptable, that's a huge, huge key to whether a material is a candidate for repurposing. Next up, E, engineering. We also use this with 3 words, ACE, A-C-E, attributes, characteristics, and engineering. What did it do in life number one? What did the material do in life number one? Was it UV protective? Was it flexible? Was it rigid? Did it float? What did it do in life number one? So what second application could there be that maybe some of those attributes, characteristics, and engineering could come into play and extend its life? So we've already talked about, but it's interesting. So I don't know if you've been raised around livestock or not, but you put a brand new galvanized metal stock tank out in a pasture. Week number one, a 1,500-pound bull jumps in there and decides to have an 8-second rodeo, and your tank is ruined. 1 week. By contrast, you put a 1,500-pound bull in an old mining tire. He invites his brother in there. Let's have a rodeo. 8 seconds, 16 seconds, 32 seconds, 64 seconds. Pretty soon the bulls all get tired and they jump out. Goodyear and Michelin put 2 and 3 inches of steel and rubber in those tires, not for life number 2, but for life number 1, hauling these big, heavy dump trucks. But it's that 2 and 3 inches of rubber. The 1,500-pound bulls had a little rodeo, and they flexed a little bit. Bulls got tired, they jumped out. It's going to last 50 to 75 years. Notice attributes, characteristics, and engineering. Lower right, one of its primary attributes on that old mining tire is missing. What's missing? Yeah, I heard it. There's no tread. Tires have tread, unless you're a race car. So they got rid of life number 1. They wore it down, wore all the tread off. But for life number 2, that attribute wasn't even necessary for life number 2. Let's go to the rail industry. So these are the big flat cars, 40 foot, 60 foot, 70 foot in diameter. These typically get retired because the axles and the hitches, interestingly, in the railroad world, they're referred to as the knuckles and the trucks. So it's just always funny how industries call the same thing. You know, if you take your car to get it fixed, it's parts and labor. If you're in the construction industry, it's time and materials. Same thing, it's just everybody has their own vocabulary. So at 30, 40 years, these get retired, typically cut into 3-foot chunks and melted, recycling. But if it's the axles and the hitches that are the problem, what are the big long I-beams doing? I mean, think about attributes, characteristics, and what are they doing? They're spanning. That's a big hint. They're spanning the axles. So if the wear part, the problem, these become obsolete, are the axles and the knuckles. Can we not just remove those and span something else? Span, in this case, bridge abutments. So, no DOT is going to go for this. No big city municipality is going to go for this. But how many bridges are on private property that aren't highly regulated? Forestry companies, ranches, on and on and on. Golf courses, hiking trails. So instead of melting it down, sending it to Cleveland to be melted, sending it to Chicago to be made into an I-beam to bring back to Pennsylvania, to be installed as a brand new bridge, could we not just keep it what it is and extend its life? Oh, now it gets fun. So notice S.A.V.E. I said that's what makes things a candidate for repurposing. Just because something's a candidate doesn't mean it's going to be commercially viable. So now we're going to talk about some fails. Hot air balloon fabric. I already talked about that the parachutes make a great repurpose item. Brides, proms, Shakespeare theaters. Hot air balloon fabric is virtually the same stuff. In fact, it's got one more attribute. It's colorful. Could you imagine if your prom was, well, it wouldn't be prom for the Christmas colors, but if you had a Christmas colored theme event, the red and green would be awesome. Why are parachutes commercially viable and hot air balloon fabric is not? Pop quiz. No one to date ever has gotten this one right. And nobody's being the risk taker and throwing out ideas, which is fine. I'll just get right to the punchline. End of life, you talk to any hot air balloon pilot. End of life, they absolutely reek. You think about it. You know, the propane, all the fumes, the moisture that's being created. I don't know if anybody's ever taken a hot air balloon ride. Where do they land? Wherever. It might be in somebody's cattle pasture. Do you think, oh my gosh, let's get this wadded up, let's get it on the trailer, let's get out of here before we scare the cattle, start a stampede? They're never allowed to dry. They're never allowed to air out. You talk to any hot air balloon pilot, end of life, they absolutely reek. Backyard wedding, you're sitting there. Not a good look. So it's interesting how things that are candidates may not become commercially viable. 2 jetliners a week, American Airlines calls, and they said, we replace 2 inflatable evacuation slides a week on our jets. They sent me this picture. This is their hangar in DFW. We can't use them anymore. FAA rules, they got to be replaced. I looked at that and I said, oh my gosh, that would be a party barge behind a speedboat. Oh man, that would be so much fun on a lake. GVA, generic, versatile, adaptable. We put this in our newsletter, and a zookeeper reaches out and said, oh my gosh, those would make great fall pads when we anesthetize the big animals. And I was blown away, because it's interesting, when our kids were little, like most parents, grandparents, you take your kids to the zoo, but we're on the front side of the zoo. We're looking in at the lions and the tigers and the monkeys, but we have no idea what's going on behind the scenes, the back operations. But this zookeeper, very familiar, said they should make great fall pads. So my wife is in the audience, and she is the punchline of this joke. So I go home to tell my wife, Tracy. I said, Tracy, this is unbelievable. This zookeeper calls, and when they are anesthetizing the big animals, she suggested these would make great fall pads. And Tracy just looks at me, and she got a tear in her eye. And I said, why are you crying? And she says, Damon, that's so sad. They're killing the big animals. I said, I didn't say euthanize. I said anesthetize. So they're just putting the big animals to sleep. They don't want them to get hurt while they tranquilize them, but they're going to wake up, Tracy. They're going to wake up. One reason why these will never make great party barges on a lake or great fall pads at a zoo. FAA rules, they have to be certifiably destroyed. They have to be shredded. So, I mean, it makes sense. They don't want these ending up on third world airlines. Tracy and I were just in Africa a month ago. So when we took off in Eswatini to fly back to Johannesburg Airport, it was good to know that that wasn't a 15-year-old inflatable slide on that jet if we were to have problems. So while you get it, it is very sad and frustrating that, I mean, this has all kinds of interesting possible second lives. Next up, speaking of airports, we've all touched them 1,000 times, hundreds of thousands of times. Escalator handrail, generic, versatile, adaptable, available, versatile, great engineering, rubber, steel cables running through it. One reason these will never become commercially viable is because probably the number one idea for these is landscape edging to separate the flower bed from the grass. Well, and this is hypothetical. I haven't checked my pricing in a while, but you can go to Lowe's, Home Depot, Menards, and get brand new galvanized metal landscape edging, let's say, for 50 cents a foot. You can't even ship this stuff for 50 cents a foot because it's so big and heavy. So it breaks down economically. So those are three examples. Just because something's a candidate for repurposing doesn't mean it's commercially or will be commercially viable. So to date, we talked about all materials. But if you take this concept and you go broader with it, there's all kinds of additional unused, obsolete, discarded, cast-off things that can get a second life. Thank you for your time.